Mississippi Development Authority, their focus is all on the big bang. Getting the Continental tire, getting the Yokohama tire, getting the Toyota, which obviously we're all happy to have, but they ignore small business. And we've talked to them about that before, and we've tried to create some programs that help small businesses. And I know Tish Hass, our chamber director back there, works on that every single day, and Les does as well, Mayor Filligan. But we don't do enough at the Mississippi Capitol to support small business. I would agree with you on that. The tourism tax, folks, all the legislature does on that is allow locals to do what they want to do on that. And so that is what's called a local and private. And the local area, Hancock County or the local municipality has to decide, usually through referendum, whether they want to impose that local tax on the citizens. So that's not something that the Mississippi legislature does except to allow them to do that.
In 2005, I want to remind you, Haley Barber and his crew made permanent the Harrison County tourism tax. Okay, I don't know if you know, or whether or not, or what church you go to, but Matthew 9:9 specifically tells the story that when Jesus saved Matthew at a tax station, where they discriminated against travelers to build the Colosseum. That's the specific lesson of Matthew. Okay. And I just want to bring that to your attention, that we received the wrath of God, that He made permanent a tourism tax.
Barbara?
Just a little bit. Where are we with the BP funds?
Okay, the question up front was, where are we with the BP funds? And I was hoping this topic would come up. This, I believe, is one of the more critical issues that we will deal with this year. And I hope that we deal with it this year, though I hear from the Lieutenant Governor and from the Governor that they're talking about, well, we don't really have to do it this year. We could kick the can down the road. I think that's a terrible idea. I filed a bill 2 years ago when we first learned about the settlement that would create an entity just like Florida did that would be governed by and populated with people on the Gulf Coast, so that we could divert money away from the legislative appropriation process down here to the Gulf Coast, and that we could decide how to leverage that money for the best long-term economic benefit. If the money is appropriated by the Mississippi legislature, it will be scattered to the four corners of this state, and we will not see the kind of economic benefit that we should on the Gulf Coast, that we deserve on the Gulf Coast. So what my bill did was, it basically, again, I've never had an original idea. I stole this from Florida, I freely admit it. But it would take 80%, they took 75% in Florida. My bill would take 80% of the money, immediately divert it down to this separate entity. I forgot what I named it, but it has a catchy Gulf Coast name. And then we would have projects that would be submitted to that entity, and they would vet those projects with a view towards making sure that they're leveraged for long-term economic benefit. Now, my bill did not pass, and nor did any other bill dealing expressly with how we, what we do with that money. It's being discussed all over the place. The folks upland, they say this was damages to the state of Mississippi. It ought to come to Mississippi, and everybody, it ought to be appropriated like every other dollar in the state of Mississippi. The coast delegation, I think, is fairly unified on this. Republican, Democrat, we're all in agreement that we ought not let that happen. We don't have a specific agreement on exactly what we should do with it, but the idea that I just mentioned of diverting it, sending it to an entity that's controlled by us down here, is one that everybody seems to be okay with. The problem in the Mississippi legislature is you don't get anything done unless you have the votes. And to have the votes, you really need leaderships imprimatur. You need the Lieutenant Governor to say, all right, I like that bill and I want it to come out of committee. Because if he says, I don't like it, I want you to kill it, it will die. Same thing in the House. The Lieutenant Governor has come down here and he said he believes, like us, that the largest percentage ought to come back to the Gulf Coast. The Governor has said something very similar. The Speaker has not commented on this, and that's bothersome. So we have some work to do there. But there are ideas that are being discussed to try to get the number of votes that we can pass our plan. But it's going to be a negotiation. It may not be 80%, it may not be 75%, it may be 60%. Or something could go south and we may not get anything like that. But there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and I think you can count on a bipartisan effort from your coast delegation to bring that money, 75–80% of it, down here to the Gulf Coast.
Who's the speaker?
The speaker is Philip Gunn. He is from Clinton. Hunter.
Yes,
A
sir.
couple more.
The question I had, I knew last year, you guys, I'm not sure, I think February or so, you guys received $150 million for the first part of the, is there any distribution of the amount or so?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for those of you who don't know, let me back up just a little bit and try to explain how this works. The BP settlement is not like a single check coming in to the Mississippi Treasury. There are what have been referred to as buckets, multiple buckets of money that can be used for different purposes. Some of those buckets are solely for environmental restoration. Some are for fisheries, for instance. The Mississippi legislature is not going to be appropriating that money. That money is going to be spent through a different process. I believe that Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality will be involved in vetting those projects. We have one underway right now, the Hancock County Marsh Restoration Project, which is a $50 million early restoration project. The legislature has nothing to do with that and those various buckets. The only thing that the legislature has anything to do with is the economic damages settlement, which was $750 million to the state of Mississippi. It's paid out as follows. $150 million came in the summer of 2016, and the balance is paid with $40 million installments over the next 17 years. So the $150 million came in, and of that amount, 42 million was appropriated in last year's budget. This is the way that went. The chairman of appropriations came to the podium in the waning days of the session and started talking about a particular appropriations bill and said, and here are the projects that are appropriated using BP money. And I asked for a question. This is one of the things we get to do. Every member has a right. And I said, so tell me about these projects. How were they decided? The chairman got a little bit of, and I said, well, I need to be able to go home and I need to be able to tell people in this room how we decided we were going to spend $42 million of BP money. Who vetted those projects and why did we decide to do this? He said, just tell them that I decided. And of course, that was frustrating to me. It was frustrating to him as well. Now, the projects may be great projects. I don't know much about them. One of them is building a dialysis center outside of the Canizaro development over in Harrison County. I forget what it's called. Y'all may know the name of that big development. And that may be a perfect expenditure. We may all agree that that is what we want to spend BP money on. I don't think so, but maybe. But there was no process for deciding how that project was going to be funded with BP money. And that is my fear. That underscores my fear of what will happen if the money just goes into the Treasury and the legislature appropriates the BP money. Now, we have $108 million remaining of that BP money that's sitting there in the Treasury right now to be appropriated through the appropriation process. And we have the future payment stream of $40 million per year. And that is the money that we're negotiating over what we're going to do with it. Ron, and I'm sorry if I missed somebody. There's another question back over here. Y'all just...
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Ron.
If we as citizens email Philip Gunn, will he listen to us? I mean, since he doesn't, we didn't elect him. We don't, he doesn't represent.
Well, ostensibly, we're all supposed to listen to everybody in Mississippi because while we represent a district, we represent the state of Mississippi. So I would encourage you guys to talk to the speaker and talk to the lieutenant governor and the governor, and not just me, but Senator Philip Moran and the other representatives up and down the coast. We need to make our voices heard on this. We need to tell our story. You may have noticed that Ashley Edwards, who is the executive director of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Business Council, I think he gave a talk day before yesterday in which he underscored the fact that the Gulf Coast has not recovered as well as the rest of the state in the wake of the housing crisis in 2008 and 2009 and the other problems that we've had, including BP. The Gulf Coast has long been thought to be the economic engine that drives the state of Mississippi. And if the money comes back down here and we use it wisely, then we will continue to be that economic engine that drives and benefits the rest of the state. So I could make a good argument, even if the oil didn't hit the three coastal counties, the money money's better spent here than it is anywhere else in the state of Mississippi. Ron?
My question was about the appropriation process. So you said that there's $108 million sitting there now to be appropriated. So as it currently stands, that would be appropriated through the regular process and be scattered to the four corners of the state.
It could be, or it could be left alone and just reserved. And right now, that's what they're talking about doing. My understanding is right now, what the Lieutenant Governor has suggested is that we just let it sit for another year until, we can get our act together on what we want to do with it. So it could be sitting in a reserve fund and not appropriated this year. But just as easily, it could be appropriated anywhere in the appropriation process. Tish?
Has the coast legislative delegation been given a list of projects by the mayors and the county supervisors, priority projects for funding for the BP funds?
I think there's been some, that's a good question. Everybody, if you didn't hear that, she's asking, has a list of projects been given to the coast delegation? There have been some meetings with local elected officials, mayors, and perhaps members of boards of supervisors as well. I have not been invited to any of those meetings, so I don't know whether it's legislators or the business community or our tourism board. I don't really know who's been involved in those meetings, but I have heard that there have been meetings. I don't know whether in those meetings specific projects, whether a list has been created of specific projects. I do know that boards of supervisors, including as far north as Hinds County, are meeting to develop their list of projects that they want to get funded right now. So if we're not doing those things, Mayor, we need to be doing those. We need to get in line because, there's no way to tell how this is going to come out. And if somebody says, all right, well, we want to hear your list of projects, we need to have been thinking about that and working on it, I believe. Yeah.
I have put 3 projects on the portal, okay,
Okay.
for small business, and they've been on the portal for several years now. It's like